You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 19th of June 2026 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
Everyone knows that politics isn't working. Tonight just could, be the turning point.
And so it proved to be, as Andy Burnham is elected member for Makerfield and is now in a position to challenge the Prime Minister to a leadership contest. We'll ask where next for the Labour Party and the British political system. Kenya says it will compensate victims of political violence. But is the government really just trying to pay off the protesters without accepting accountability? There's a housing crisis in Australia. We'll cross to Sydney to find out why. Andrew Muller tells us what he's learned about the scale of Donald Trump's conquest of the Middle East, and we'll bring you a roundup of design news. And finally...
There are people coming in here and really putting their life on the line for the work that they're showing, and they really believe in it. The Aboriginal Pavilion is groundbreaking.
Sophie Monaghan-Coombs has been meeting gallerists at Art Basel and reports back on the event. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Planned US-Iran talks in Geneva have been thrown into doubt after Vice President J.D. Vance pulled out of today's meeting, raising fresh uncertainty over the ceasefire agreement. Volodymyr Zelensky has urged the European Union to fast-track Ukraine's membership, arguing Europe's future security is being decided on the battlefield. And Qantas Airways has unveiled plans for the world's longest non-stop commercial flight, linking Sydney and London from 2027. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Andy Burnham has won the Makerfield by-election, returning the former Greater Manchester Mayor to Westminster and sharply increasing pressure on Keir Starmer. Labour held the seat comfortably, but the results matter far beyond one constituency, raising questions about Labour's future, the rise of Reform UK, the strain on Britain's two-party system and the country's political stability. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by Terry Stiastany, a political journalist and the author of Believable Lies, The Misfits Who Fought Churchill's Secret Propaganda War. Terry, many thanks for joining us this morning. How significant is this result?
I think this is probably one of the most significant by-elections in recent British political history. And the reason for that is probably because, we are very likely to see a change of Prime Minister over the summer, possibly within the next couple of weeks, because Sir Keir Starmer is in such a weak position, and this really decisive victory by Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, who is now going to be heading back to Westminster, gives his MPs an alternative that seems to them to suggest we can change things, we can turn our electoral fortunes around, which is such a strange thing to be saying only 2 years after Keir Starmer won a massive election victory. But, given the depth of unhappiness that there is currently with the current Prime Minister, I think, this is going to be the catalyst for a big change.
So, there are basically going to be two centres of power within the Labour Party.
Yes, the question is for how long. So Andy Burnham is going to come back. He's going to be a new MP for Makerfield. Now he will be sworn in probably the beginning of next week. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has said, despite lots of MPs so far calling on him to go, that he wants to stay and fight a contest if somebody else triggers a leadership election. Now, that no one has actually done that yet. So both Andy Burnham if he were elected, and Wes Streeting, the former health secretary who resigned, have been suggesting that that is likely, that they would have the support of enough Labour MPs to be able to challenge the Prime Minister. No one's actually sort of, pulled the trigger on that yet, but that is very likely to happen. The question is whether Keir Starmer decides, OK, my time is up, I don't have the support of my MPs, or whether he wants to stay and fight for what he is sort of let know. He said, well, I won the election victory, there's important international things going on, I should stay and still be Prime Minister.
And before we take the wider view on this, just tell me a little bit about how the right-wing parties fared, because Reform UK was predicted to do very well, and indeed has done very well in that constituency previously.
They had done well. They had done well there at the last general election. Also, the local elections at the beginning of May, Reform had done really well. I think the interesting thing, though, here in this by-election result is the scale of Andy Burnham's win. I mean, he got 55% of the vote as the Labour candidate. Reform had got 35% of the vote, and a party which is even further to the right than Reform, Restore Britain, which is Rupert Lowe's party, got 7% of the vote. So there was a split in the right-wing vote there, but they still, even combined, would not have beaten Labour. And I think that is one of the key things that people see in an Andy Burnham potential leadership, is that he is somebody who could maybe, bring that to the rest of the Labour Party. But it does also suggest that Reform, who in this case had a fairly weak candidate, but it does suggest that they have got a limit on their support, even in constituencies where at local elections that they have been doing quite well.
So Britain's had 6 prime ministers since 2016 and could soon have a 7th. What does this say about the stability of British politics and how our voting system works?
I think that this is a really interesting one. There's been a whole debate raging in this country about whether the country has just become ungovernable, or whether we have just ended up with people who were pretty unsuitable candidates to be Prime Minister. And I think, in a way, I would tend towards the latter view. I think we have had people who lack the ability to do certain parts of the job. In the case of someone like Theresa May or someone like Keir Starmer, they got there through their party system but weren't really able to communicate about what they were doing or to bring their own MPs with them. You had Liz Truss very briefly, who really just wasn't suited to the job at all. You had Boris Johnson, who again, very, good on the communications part, bad at actually putting things into action and actually running the organisation. So it's a weird skill set to be Prime Minister. There's a lot of power concentrated in that office. And for one reason or another, and sort of internal party dynamics, we just haven't had those kind of rounded characters who are able to be on top of the whole thing, I think.
Well, is Burnham up to it? What will his leadership look like?
So, yeah, Burnham is interesting because he failed in leadership contests before. He was a health secretary in a previous Labour government. But I think the best indication we can get of what he would be like is that he has been the mayor of Greater Manchester for the last 9 years. He focused a lot on issues like transport. He has talked a lot about rebalancing the economy so that it benefits places which are outside of London, which he feels have been left behind and ignored. He talked in his speech when he won this morning about having a kind of a Makerfield test. Does a policy in Westminster benefit people in places outside of the capital? And he has also talked more about, bringing more industries under state controls and nationalisation. So he will be further to the left on quite a few issues if he is Prime Minister. We don't know that much about, what he would do internationally, or there's a whole load of views where, he obviously hasn't been questioned on those much over the last few years.
Do you think that his premiership might bring Britain closer to Europe? He opposed Brexit.
He did oppose Brexit, and he has shifted his view slightly on that. Now, whether that was just because of the circumstances of a by-election is one question. So certainly at the last Labour Party conference, he said, I hope in my lifetime I see this country rejoin the EU. But when he was asked about the issue of Europe and Brexit during the election campaign, more recently, he said he didn't want to rerun those old arguments. So I think, his heart is more closely with remain or rejoin. But whether whether he sees that if he's in an electoral battle against reform, that he would have to hedge about that a bit. We don't really know. So we know that he's not a Brexiter, but whether he wants to try and fight that battle of rejoin, which Wes Streeting, who's a potential leadership rival, he said perhaps we should be going back into the EU sooner rather than later. It'd be interesting to see if that's an issue that comes up.
And finally, what do you think his leadership might mean for British foreign and defence policy?
Well, one of the big issues that has been facing Keir Starmer, and he lost his defence secretary over it just a couple of days ago, is the issue of defence spending. Keir Starmer wasn't willing to increase the amount of money that he was spending on defence as much as the defence secretary would have liked, John Healey, so he resigned. I think this is an area where Andy Burnham is pretty much untested. I think he would be unlikely to shift in terms of, basic issues like support for Ukraine and British foreign policy in that regard. But I think it's often British leaders tend to come in with not very fixed views on a lot of foreign policy issues, and they have to figure out what's going on. But I think it's probably a more, an area of more continuity, perhaps, with Sir Keir Starmer, assuming that, of course, that's what happens, and that Starmer doesn't stay on.
Yeah, and if it did happen, how soon could that happen?
It could happen within a matter of days. A lot of the thinking is that they will allow Keir Starmer to sit and reflect over the weekend on Andy Burnham's win and whether he would like to, announce that he's stepping down. I think there will be quite a lot of pressure on him to potentially do that. But Keir Starmer has said that he doesn't want to do that. If he wants to stay and fight, and there is a leadership contest, that could take place over the summer within a matter of a few weeks, possibly by the end of July, possibly could be held off until the Labour Party conference in September. But I think it's going to be a hot political summer in any case.
Terry, thank you very much indeed. That's Terry Stiastony there, political journalist and author of the book Believable Lies, The Misfits Who Fought Churchill's Secret Propaganda War. This is The Globalist. 12 minutes past 9 in Nairobi, 7:12 here in London. Kenya is preparing to compensate thousands of people affected by years of political unrest and anti-government protests. President William Ruto's government says the payments are intended to acknowledge the harm suffered by victims and their families, making this one of the most significant payouts in years. Well, I'm joined now by Catherine Harald, who's a journalist and former Nairobi bureau chief of the Washington Post. Catherine, welcome to Monocle. It's lovely to have you with us on the show. Exactly what has the government announced?
So the Kenyan government has announced that they will pay out about $15 million in reparations and compensation for about 2,000 victims of human rights abuses dating back to 2017. So that covers post-election violence, protests, demonstrations, and killings of civilians by police.
And why have they decided to act now?
Well, there's been interest in this for a very long time, and Kenya has an extremely strong civil society that's been working for this. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has been pushing this for years, but I'm also aware that elections are coming up, and more protests were scheduled for next week to commemorate those who were killed in protests against a finance bill last year. So it's a good time for them to do this right now.
Who's eligible for these payouts and who decides who's eligible?
So the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has documented slightly over 1,800 claims, and they've got slightly over 1,000 from the Independent Police Oversight Authority, which is authorized to investigate police abuses. And those claims range from the families of people who were murdered by police, or people who were raped, tortured. Some people were subjected to enforced disappearances. Some people have disappeared and never been found after being abducted by state agents. So there's quite a lot of people who are eligible and who've suffered a wide range of abuses.
And this is all pertains to state abuse. It's not violence between protesters.
So that's a difficult one because there's a long history here of politicians paying what are known as goons. And these are armed groups of thugs that will set upon people on the streets. They're very easy to spot. They all show up together on motorbikes and with wooden clubs. They've even invaded like an operating theater where a woman was having a C-section. It's been terrible. So that is more difficult to parse, and that has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Right now, it's people who have been abused by state security forces.
And so how has this government decision to pay out been received by victim groups? I mean, do they think that the government has gone far enough?
I think a lot of victims are really concerned about making sure that this doesn't happen again. And the offer of compensation has been welcomed. But what people really, really want is to make sure this doesn't happen again. And just earlier this week, we saw peaceful protesters who were demonstrating against building in the Nairobi National Park, tear gassed by police and detained. And those protesters included the former Chief Justice of Kenya. So the problem is not yet over.
I understand you've been speaking to some of them.
Yes, I have. I spoke to a gentleman called Bernard Kavuli, who's the convener of one victims group, and he shared his views with us.
So the fact that they are compensating is an admission that the government shot innocent protesters, they abducted, they killed, they arbitrarily arrested some of them, and therefore now they're admitting that they are sorry, and therefore we're going to give you something as a way of saying sorry.
So, I mean, is there a feeling there that is there sort of scepticism about this being a payout, but there's no actual accountability?
Well, accountability doesn't end with a payout. Accountability means reform of the police. It means strengthening the oversight authority. It means strengthening the judiciary. It needs a better investigative capacity. So the National Human Rights Commission has come out with 5 pillars that they say all need to be observed if these abuses are going to stop. And while reparations are very welcome, they're certainly not the most important one or the end of this process.
So do you think this could help heal political wounds and buy Ruto some goodwill? Is that what he's after?
Yes, I think it is a good first step, and it's the first time that the Kenyan government has ever done this. I think that I wouldn't like to speculate about buying goodwill. I have been out on the streets when these protests were happening and seen police, for example, spray really very strong tear gas directly into a medical tent and see people beaten by police on the streets and had to run away from them myself. I've been covering these protests since 2007. So there is a lot of work to be done, let's say. I'm not sure we're at the stage of forgive and forget yet.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. That's Catherine Horald, who's a journalist and former Nairobi bureau chief of the Washington Post. And now, still to come on the programme.
We learned, yes, that the man who got elected promising to drain the swamp has instead installed one.
Andrew Muller on algae, cage fights, orange men and schadenfreude. This is The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office Houseview, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's jump straight into a review of today's newspapers, and joining me in the studio to do that is Claudine Fry, who's a partner at Control Risk. Good morning to you, Claudine, looking very sporty. I understand you're going to run back from the studio.
Good morning. Yes, that's right.
Although I'm enormously impressed.
It'll be a slow run.
Let's pick up on US politics, because Pete Hegseth has unveiled a 6-month review of US military presence in Europe. Now, this is a story from the FT, but he's been bashing NATO again, hasn't he? He's not been making any friends.
Yeah, that's right. There's been a lot of optimism in this week after the G7 summit took place, and largely successfully, with US President Trump joining the other world leaders there for the whole of the event. Last year, memorably, Trump sort of stormed off after the first day of the event that was hosted in Canada. This time he stayed all the way, and there seemed to be a relatively good sense of sort of bonhomie between Europe and the United States on a whole host of issues, including Iran and Ukraine. But yes, Pete Hegseth has come out strongly, providing further criticism of Europe and asserting that Europe is still not getting the message that the US has been sending for some time now about the need to rapidly ramp up its efforts to be able to defend itself and wean itself off dependence on the United States. He's announced a 6-month review of the American forces that are in Europe, and the broad expectation is that this will be the moment when the United States specifies exactly what sort of capabilities it's going to withdraw, and perhaps even provides a time frame for those withdrawals as well.
And this is because the US needs the money itself. The Pentagon's just asked for, I think it's $80 billion for Iran and various other things.
That's right. I mean, of course, there's a degree to which this is, a face value about encouraging Europe to step up and move faster to defend itself. But of course, yes, at the same time, it can't be seen in any other way except that also in the context of the enormous amount of money that the United States has spent and continues to spend in and around Iran, and the sheer amount of sort of military equipment and weaponry that has been used up in Iran is astonishing. It's been widely reported that the war has potentially cost about $2 billion a day, there's more Patriot missiles were fired by the United States at Iran in the first 4 days of the war than have been given to Ukraine in 4 years. So the toll of this war is astonishing in terms of the cost to the United States. And of course, that ultimately ends up being a cost to taxpayers. And the Wall Street Journal is running with this story about $80 billion more to cover costs from the Iran war, but it's also for other non-war related bills. So what is that? That's food security, disaster relief, farms? Yeah, so the Reuters has got hold of this report that the Wall Street Journal is citing, and apparently, yes, that the government in the United States is about to ask lawmakers for some extra funding to cover a range of things, yes, including civilian apparently sort of agriculture support, and of course, this is just months ahead of the midterms coming up later this year. The government with an eye on the fact that Americans are feeling the pinch, and partly that's relating to the higher cost of gasoline on account of what's been happening in the Middle East. But the trade war has also had an effect on inflation, and Trump is not a popular president. So the government will be looking for ways to shore up levels of support for the Republican Party ahead of those midterms.
And they're also trying to shore up the ceasefire agreement, but not turning up in Geneva doesn't seem to be the way to do it. Tell us more about this story. J.D. Vance has said he's not going. He was expected there today. We don't even know who the Iranian delegation is. Are these talks ever going to happen?
Oh, good question. I don't think we should necessarily put a bet on if they will or when they will. So there's been all sorts of back and forth this week about the status of the peace deal that has supposedly been agreed between the United States and Iran, around who was going to sign it, how they were going to sign it. It's now been confirmed that it's been signed digitally, so there is no need apparently for a sort of official in-person signing ceremony in Europe, which was scheduled to take place today in Switzerland. And Vice President J.D. Vance had been due to turn up for that signing ceremony and also to start technical negotiations on some of the substantive issues that have been left to further discussion. The peace deal sets out that there's a 60-day period which allows for the US and Iran to take more time to try to come to an agreement about some of the more contentious issues that divide them, including the status of Iran's nuclear agreement and further discussions on how the Strait of Hormuz will be managed over the longer term. But yes, J.D. Vance has said he doesn't know exactly when he's going to go now. And there's a sort of continuing stream of statements out of both Iran and the United States, which mean that we should continue to treat the deal with a huge amount of scepticism and caution.
And I mean, if it was a big thing, Trump would not pass up an opportunity to have a photo op signing a great big document with his traditional Sharpie.
Exactly. Yeah. He did unexpectedly sign the agreement at the Palace of Versailles in France earlier this week while he was in France, but has also signed it digitally.
Yeah. So let's turn to Barbados now, because the Prime Minister there has announced a manifesto for slavery reparations.
Yeah, so this is The Guardian running a piece about a conference that's taking place in Ghana, which is pushing the case for reparatory justice. This is a number of different countries in the global south who are continuing a long-running campaign for acknowledgement of what they describe as crimes against humanity, essentially committed by colonial powers in previous centuries, and calling for the payment of reparations for the mistreatment of people during those times, particularly in relation to the slave trade. And the Barbadian Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, at this event in Ghana, has announced a new manifesto from Caribbean leaders, which has gone further than previous documents in terms of the kind of language that it's used and the demands that it's making. It's calling for monetary compensation as reparations from enslaving nations, monarchies, churches, institutions, corporations, and families for the loss of life and uncompensated labour, loss of liberty, and so on. And I think this is really interesting because it's one of the areas where we're seeing countries in the global south asserting themselves on the global stage. And I think it's going to be an issue which the global north, the United States and former colonial powers in Europe can't sort of completely shut down. It's an issue that keeps coming up.
Finally, something a bit lighter. The Grammy Awards have added a new category. It's for Best Asian Pop Music Performance, but people are really not happy. What's behind that?
Yeah, so perhaps belatedly, given that Asian pop, particularly K-pop, has been storming the charts in the West for quite some time now, the Grammys has acknowledged that contribution by announcing that there will be a new category this year for Asian music, Asian pop music, alongside others, a new Best Latin Song, Best Traditional Pop Vocal Performance, and Best Traditional Folk Album, for example. But yes, it's not news that has been welcomed broadly everywhere because there is some concern. Well, number one, it's arguably belated, but secondly, it's also as one commentator in Asia has noted, it sort of lumps together lots of different kinds of artists. There is also J-pop and C-pop, and this category just sort of puts together lots of different types of artists from across an enormous region.
And what kind of pop will you be listening to on your run across the park?
Well, if it was up to my 12-year-old, it would be K-pop, but probably not. I'll be listening to you.
Right answer. You can come again. Claudine Fry, thank you very much indeed. Claudine's a partner at Control Risk, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Technical talks between the United States and Iran were due to begin today in Geneva as the next step in implementing this week's ceasefire agreement. But US Vice President J.D. Vance pulled out, citing logistical challenges, and Iran has yet to confirm its delegation, raising fresh doubts about whether the talks will go ahead. Volodymyr Zelensky has told EU leaders that bringing Ukraine into the bloc more quickly would be Europe's strongest long-term security guarantee. He also warned that Kyiv needs more missiles, fuel and financial support before winter as Russia intensifies strikes. And Qantas Airways says its non-stop Sydney to London service will launch in October 2027, using specially modified Airbus A350 aircraft for flights of up to 22 hours. The airline is betting travellers will pay a premium for cutting journey times, though questions remain over comfort, pricing and demand. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's just coming up to 16:30 in Sydney, 8:30 in Zurich. So Australia's housing market is slowing. New forecasts suggest prices will be largely flat this year as higher interest rates, tax changes and affordability pressures weigh on demand. At the same time, planners in Sydney are exploring an unusual idea, building homes around electricity substations to ease the housing shortage. Well, from Sydney, I'm joined by Katie Silver, Australian journalist and broadcaster for outlets including the BBC and CNN. Katie, before we get into this housing slowdown, I just wanted to get your take on this announcement from Qantas that we've just heard in our headlines. Do we know what's planned?
Well, it's a long time coming. So it was actually back in 2017, the airline announced that it wanted to basically do these ultra long haul flights, as you say, 22 hours all the way from Sydney to London and back. It was known as Project Sunrise. There are now apparently 12 specially designed planes in order to make it happen later next year. Now, we have already seen so far direct flights from London to Perth and London to the Northern Territory. I haven't been unlucky enough to have to take one yet because I think anyone who's been on a relatively long haul flight knows that there's a certain point where you're desperate to get off. And so I think that is one of the potential weaknesses of this flight. I mean, I think some people will enjoy the efficiencies and getting there quite quickly, but of course it is a very, very long time. And probably the two biggest losers out of it, if it does come about, will be Singapore and Dubai, who often, of course, popular stop-off destinations on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes there's no, getting home is the most important thing. And let's talk about home because, as I say, the housing market's slowing. What's behind that?
Well, there's a lot of things. A big part of it, of course, is interest rates. So they're so high at the moment and therefore people can't borrow enough money to buy. We're seeing as well, of course, cost of living pressures. And that means that with people struggling to buy groceries, they are certainly going to then be struggling to buy houses as well. Costs across the board up. All of this means as well that renters are less likely to spend. So for landlords, it's tougher here as well. And they're, of course, also facing higher rents too. So that's a number of factors. Also, we are seeing less migration to Australia. There was a big post-COVID surge, and that, therefore, is also kind of constraining some of that demand.
And is this happening across the country or are some areas holding value?
It is primarily the two big cities, Sydney and Melbourne, that are feeling it the worst. And particularly the expensive suburbs in these areas. So as you can imagine, for example, some buyers are instead looking to cheaper suburbs in the big metropolitan areas. When it comes to cities like Perth, Brisbane and Adelaide, growth is continuing there, but it is easing. It's certainly not what it was. Property in Australia is a national sport. Everybody is interested in it. It's the number one topic of conversation probably when you catch up with friends. And so it has really formed a big part of, I guess, the Australian psyche.
And tell us about changes to the property tax.
Yeah, so this it's called negative gearing. And what it meant was that in some ways landlords couldn't lose. So if you were working and paying income tax and you also had a property that you put out to rent. If, for example, rates were high and your mortgage, you couldn't service your mortgage from what you received in rentals or the strata costs were high, things like that, you could basically offset that against your income tax. So there was this big benefit for landlords. And what that has done is over years and years very much pushed up the prices of homes. What we heard announced by the government in May was that they were no longer going to be allowing negative gearing. Huge shock for the housing market. Morgan Stanley, for example, estimates it could push the values down by about 10%. And the other element as well is that they've said that there's going to be differences to capital gains taxes as well. So two big tax changes that, on paper, people are still very much trying to get their heads around it. I receive multiple letters from accountants kind of explaining to me how it works. But it's certainly something that people are trying to work out exactly what it means for them.
Let's talk about the extent of Sydney's housing crisis. Are there not enough homes or just no affordable homes?
It's kind of a combination, I guess. So there aren't enough homes, and the government is trying to actively change that. So, for example, there's if you have a property within 400 metres of a station or shops, now you can develop it. You could add townhouses to it. They're massively trying to increase the number of dwellings, but also, yes, there's this huge demand as well. So it does seem to be a combination. They're also trying to incentivise the building of new homes. So some benefits, for example, those capital gains benefits and changes that I mentioned, some of them don't apply to new builds. So they are trying to actively help developers to build more properties. But a lot of this, of course, comes too because we've had rural-urban migration, fewer people living in the countryside, more people wanting to live in the cities, and all of that has driven up demand in these major metropolitan areas as well.
Tell me more about this proposal to build houses around electricity substations.
Yeah, it sounds farcical, but I guess it's a sign of the times of just what level of crisis the housing market is at here. So they are dilapidated properties that were, as I say, decommissioned substations, often not needed anymore because, for example, the grid has made them redundant. So they've been sitting there empty, sometimes in very nice areas. So a couple that I was reading about, one, for example, in Bondi, one of the most affluent areas in Sydney, and it's going into the hammer next week, and it's projected to sell for about a third of the value of surrounding properties of similar sizes. So I guess one may be able to get a bargain of them for as it comes to the electricity companies themselves. They no longer have to pay the maintenance costs to keep them. So they've been sitting in various places. I for example, about 6 months ago, looked at a property that looked out onto a dilapidated old substation, and they're just kind of sitting around the city doing nothing. And now there's talk of potentially putting them, we're seeing more and more demand for them to be sold and either to be used as commercial properties or as for housing as well.
Do you think people will want to live there? I mean, I guess they'd tear them down.
Yes, it's a question. So I'm serious. I mean, there is some element to them that could be quite charming, and then they're certainly not, under kind of any heritage listing, so people can tear them down. I think I was reading about somebody who talked about like the beauty of this, decommissioned structure, and there may well be, just like the Battersea power station in London. There's something charming about that, perhaps. Same with some of these substations. As they are currently, they're dilapidated, there's weeds, they're not necessarily structurally sound in some places. So certainly I'm sure they're not an attractive proposition. But as I say, if, desperate needs must. And so for many people, I'm sure it's still going to be a nice way to at least get onto the property market.
And finally, do you think, or is it the mood that the government, the authorities are doing enough to lessen this housing crisis?
It really depends who you speak to. So those, I guess, in affluent areas or, the big conversation, of course, is baby boomers who managed to benefit from decades of negative gearing, as I was talking about, or that they got in at a cheaper time. I think for them, they may feel, and we've definitely heard opposition on this front in nice suburbs, like one that I can think of is called Wallara, and it's not far from Bondi, it's in the eastern suburbs. There was a lot of opposition there to the building or the zoning of blocks to be made into units because they worried about, traffic and saying that there's not enough public transport, those kind of things. And I guess seeing their property values decline because of this increase. But then at the same time, there is this crisis as well. Other things the government is doing that I'd say is beneficial is investing in public transport. So Sydney did have something of a vacuum. There's a lot of suburbs that weren't connected by train or rail. And in the last few years, we've seen the implementation of a very impressive metro system, a light rail system that connects to the eastern suburbs beaches. And that is all about trying to make it more livable and trying to make certain suburbs that are further away not as far because of public transport, but still a long way to go on that front as well.
Katie, thank you very much indeed. That's Katie Silver in Sydney. She's an Australian journalist and broadcaster for outlets including the BBC and CNN. And this is Monocle Radio. And now it's time for Andrew Muller's Weekly Musings. It's What We Learned.
We learned this week more of the strange, inadvertent genius of US President Donald Trump for confecting accidental metaphors for his own administration.
The reflecting pool has turned into a hotbed of activity. We have crews behind me that are using vacuums to suction up the algae that has accumulated and turned the reflecting pool from the blue, clear water to now a very murky green.
We learned, yes, that the man who got elected promising to drain the swamp has instead installed one, where the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool used to be. We learned that the $14.2 million of taxpayers' money that Trump had spent on painting the pool dark blue, awarded, incidentally, in a no-bid contract to a company which had previously worked on the president's golf courses, but there is almost certainly nothing whatsoever suspicious about that, had precisely the opposite effect upon algae to that which Trump might have hoped for, prompting drastic action.
We also saw crews earlier today dumping in gallon after gallon of hydrogen peroxide into the water.
Not the first time Donald Trump has attempted to remedy an awkward cosmetic issue with hydrogen peroxide, am I right? It's a joke about his hair, and an extremely good one. Tough crowd. We learned, relatedly, that presidential birthday celebrations might have come down a notch or two in the style, grace and general pizzazz departments across the last half dozen decades or so from this.
Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
To this.
And lastly, Michelle Obama is a man. Am I right, America?
We learned, yes, that President Trump's insistence on spending his 80th birthday watching sweaty men wrestling in a cage beneath a stars and stripes spangled contraption towering over what used to be the south lawn of the White House had proved every bit as stately and dignified as might have been predicted.
The fights took place in an 8-sided cage beneath a massive canopy known as the Claw.
Verily, it was like that time Franklin Roosevelt held a monster truck's tug-of-war in the Rose Garden, or Dwight Eisenhower installed a mechanical bull in the Lincoln bedroom. But we learned just how important a moment in the history of the Republic staging an Ultimate Fighting Championship fixture in the White House grounds had been, and we learned this from Marco Rubio, a man whose long ago expressed wish of one day becoming US Secretary of State clearly caused a monkey's paw to twitch somewhere.
When President Kennedy announced that we were going to put a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth, no one thought that was possible, and we did it. We are a nation founded on doing what no one else dared to do and no one else aspired to do. And at some level, that's what this whole company, what UFC has been.
One giant leap from the top rope for mankind. Is that anything? But we learned that even while enjoying all of the above, there were also fireworks and a fly past, though no word as yet as to whether birthday party guests were given a little slice of cake to take home in a bag. The president had also found time to deliver in the war in the Persian Gulf the result he had long promised. Abject capitulation, utter humiliation, a generational reduction in strength and credibility. And remember, he never said whose. How weird does it sound if we play the Marine Corps March backwards to cleverly signify shambolic retreat? Yeah, that's just a din. Stick with what we had. We learned anyway that after nearly 4 months of war, hundreds of American casualties, thousands of Iranian casualties, an expenditure of tens of billions of American taxpayers' dollars, barely countable damage to the global economy, and, we do not for 1 second doubt, an amount of careful strategizing and mature reflection, the president had decided that, you know what, it's not really that big a deal if Iran has ballistic missiles after all. Everyone else has. Who cares?
I said, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to let Saudi Arabia have missiles, but they can't have them? Yes, sir. Doesn't work that way, you know?
And we learned that a bit of enriched uranium isn't really a thing between friends anyway.
It is a little hard, though, when you say that somebody wants it, other people have it, other adjoining states have it, and you're not letting them have it for purposes of electricity and things like that. It's always a little tough. You have to use a little common sense.
And it's probably not worth the hassle of going and getting it.
You could make the case why you're even bothering, because it's not really valuable. It's, it's probably $500,000 worth. It's not very valuable stuff.
And that, at any rate, we learned the people running Iran, whoever indeed they at this point even are not such bad guys once you get to know them.
We're dealing with people that I think are very rational people, and they were nice to deal with. They were strong people, smart people.
Even if they are, we learned, a little bit backward.
Frankly, they have, in one way, a primitive culture.
Like they probably celebrate their leader's birthday by encouraging muscle-bound oafs to punch each other unconscious in some sort of Mad Max bouncy castle or something. But we learned that even while playing, and obviously very much not in any way losing this complicated game of six-dimensional geostrategic chess, the president had not lost sight of what really matters.
About Greenland, sir?
About who?
Greenland? Did you talk about Greenland?
No, we didn't discuss Greenland.
Not at all?
I should discuss Greenland.
Aside from anything else, round about now, what with one thing and another, Greenland would probably fancy its chances. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Thank you, Andrew. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Now I'm joined by Tim Abrams, who's host of the Super Urbanism podcast, to bring us some stories from the world of design. Tim, good morning to you. I understand you're joining us from Essen, Germany. What are you doing there?
Hello. Yes, I'm at the Manifesta Biennale, which is based across the Ruhr Valley. I'm currently in Essen, but the Biennale takes in Duisburg, Bochum, Gelsenkirchen, the exotic parts of the former industrial sector in Germany, also Dortmund. And the Biennale is an itinerant Biennale, which was established in 1996 and visits different locations across Europe. It's pan-European. And this time it's disused or abandoned churches across the Ruhr Valley.
So tell us more. What have you seen as part of it?
The interesting thing about the Manifesta Biennale is it's very much located in pushing contemporary art into dealing with historical issues. And here they're obviously looking at what happens to social infrastructure when the ideas behind that are perhaps not as popular as anymore. And it's really the great thing about Manifesta is it finds amazing places to put contemporary art. What becomes the question is whether the questions it wants answered, whether contemporary art can really answer those. So I've seen a kind of huge variety of amazing work in different places, but one wonders whether the social proposition that the Manifesta Biennale is trying to examine, what happens, whether contemporary art is really the kind of answer to that. I saw a work by a guy called Abbas Zahidi in this amazing place called the Liebfrauenkirche, which contains work which was in the 1958 Brussels Expo. And you saw contemporary art really trying to struggle to kind of come up with an idea of how this might be used in a contemporary way. I think, being an architecture writer, that part of the interesting thing about Manifesta is the way that it kind of spines out the problems, social problems, but actually some of the ideas and solutions might be architectural ideas. What does one do with an empty church? Well, one thinks of a community or social role for it, and how does one do that? Well, contemporary art, possibly not the best way of solving that. Perhaps architecture is.
Mm-hmm. You've also been to the Design Museum in Kent.
Yeah. Design, again, the process of Flanders becoming the design destination in Europe continues apace. I don't know how they managed to do it on the small budgets they have, but a massive expansion of an existing facility in Ghent, a kind of smaller Flanders version of the V&A, a collection of applied arts, furniture and other products dating from the 19th century is being rethought and recast and reimagined in a new, expanded facility done by the English practice, Carmody Grawk, London-based practice, Carmody Grawk, which is an interesting flip because for so long architects in the UK have been influenced by what's been happening in Flanders and Belgium with clever ideas for reuse, and now we have an English-based practice going over to Flanders to work on a retrofit to try and bring together this amazing assortment of different architectures into one institution, and they've done so very, very well. Although it's perhaps I've never heard a building more criticised by the local public than I have this one. I can't repeat some of the things I was told in a local bar afterwards about the building, but I think it just goes to show that they're working in an environment which has perhaps there's no higher level of civic pride than a Flanders ex-merchant city has, and I think the building is playing into that. And I think over time, this modernist crown, which sits and looks towards the castle, the 19th century kind of reinvention of a medieval castle across the way, it will be loved in time. It's going to take a bit of time.
And part of that objection is that they've formed low carbon bricks made from municipal waste.
Yeah, the grey from a distance doesn't really necessarily lend itself to the red brick of the traditional Flemish red brick, which we know across the UK, across the world for its colours and qualities. But actually, when you get up close, it's amazing. It's a brick that's been made from ceramics and windscreen waste. So it's got a third of the carbon footprint of a Flemish brick, and it sparkles in the sunlight when you get close to it. So I think that quality, which really sums up a lot of the design culture in Flanders and Belgium wider at the moment, that kind of environmental consciousness, cost efficiency, but a little bit of gritty sparkle as well. I think that really, if you're looking for a kind of metaphor for Flemish design culture, it's right there in this brick.
And finally, a quick look at the London Museum, which is reopening in November.
Yes, the date of opening has been announced, 28th of November 2026. The world's largest city museum is currently being branded as, and I think with some conviction. What is interesting, I think, is the description of what you will begin to see in the exhibition. There's the pride of place goes to the Whitechapel Fatberg. I don't know if you know the Fatberg, and it's
not personally.
No, it's not a friend of yours. No, it's it was shall we say, a sewer-based ecological phenomenon from the 1990s, which explains some of the difficulties that London infrastructure has. There's also the Lord Mayor's coach. So there's going to be some Banksy in there, Charles I's execution vest. But one of the most interesting things, I think, is the way in which the exhibition space is going to be underground and next to one of the main train lines which traverses through London from north to south, the Thameslink line. And so one of the exhibition spaces will be a kind of large vitrine where you can actually see the trains rumbling through the exhibition space as you go through. Next to and adjacent to that will be the Cheapside Hoard, one of the most significant collections of Elizabethan and Jacobean jewellery. And I think that this very intense, evocative combination of different things in one single subterranean space is going to make the museum to be quite a unique performance and exhibition venue.
It sounds wonderful. Tim, thank you very much indeed. That's Tim Abrams, host of the Super Urbanism podcast, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Finally, on today's show, one of the world's premier cultural events, Art Basel, is currently ongoing. And I'm joined in the studio now by Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture, Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, who was there earlier in the week. Sophie, welcome back home. And thank you so much for coming in early to chat to me. Let's start by telling us about the mood on the ground in Art Basel, because it's sort of often seen as very grand, but also quite frenetic.
Yes, I think frenetic is a very apt word. It was really busy and it actually felt very positive, much more so than I was expecting. There were a few new aspects to the fair that have debuted for the first time in Basel. So one of them is this Basel exclusive, which is all about keeping one artwork out of your communications before the fair so that there's an element of surprise. People see it for the first time in person. And I think that was, one of the gallerists described it to me like a treasure hunt that had been introduced for those special artworks. And also 010, this new sector dedicated to digital artworks. I spoke to a couple of the gallerists there and they seemed really positive about their presence and also their sales, which was maybe a little bit surprising. And then yesterday, just before I left, I actually saw one of their Artist Conversations, which is a series which is running throughout the week of half-an-hour conversations with artists. And I saw Arthur Jaffa, who is one of my absolute favourite artists working today. And it was a completely rammed room. There were people standing around the back. There were people sat on the floor. So it was really busy and, yeah, it felt very buoyant.
What about the Volta Art Fair?
So Volta Art Fair happens around the corner. It's a little bit smaller and there it's a little bit kind of friendlier. The works are a lot cheaper. There's a whole move to keep plenty of works kind of under 5,000 Swiss francs. And I spoke to Lee Cavalieri about the kind of innovation there. So maybe we can hear a little bit of him.
There are people coming in here and really putting their life on the line for the work that they're showing, and they really believe in it. We've got, the Aboriginal Pavilion is groundbreaking. It's the first time anyone's done this outside of Australia. That's a risk, but they believe it. They really believe in it, and they know it, and they can sell it, and it's working. I think it stems from passion and understanding their artists and knowing what they want to do with them. And a lot of them are believing in some quite crazy stuff, which is great, and that's what we want. And I think it really enlivens the place to see that happening. And we've got an installation here, which there'll be performances, we have dance, we have a couple of really interesting installations, we've got some groundbreaking digital work. This is a sign that innovation is still alive and kicking.
That was Lee Cavalieri, who is the director of Volta Art Fair. And I think what he says there about, innovation, it is happening within Art Basel in Basel itself. They're introducing these new things, but I think also you need to look around the city at Volta, at another satellite fair, Lister, or the Basel Social Club. There's so much happening. It's not just about, what goes on in the Messeplatz.
And finally, just a quick look at some museum highlights.
Yes, of course, there are plenty of great museum shows which are timed to happen alongside Art Basel too, which I loved. Helen Frankenthaler, who has a show at the Kunstmuseum. So she was a real pioneer of abstract expressionism. And the show is, it's amazing. It's her first institutional solo show in Switzerland. It brings together some of her really big, colourful, riotous works and alongside works that she was inspired by. One thing that I really loved here was that they include some of her notebooks with her notes that she made when she was visiting museums, particularly in Europe. So she would say, she's kind of going through these works, ticking off the ones she's seen, and she'll say, like, nice and light, but really don't like it. And you get a real sense of her taste, and I really loved that. And then secondly, at the Fondation Weiler, there is a Pierre Huyghe show. He is a French artist. This one is very conceptual. It's incredibly sparse. These different rooms with some video works, some very strange sort of floating rocks. There is a mechanical worm on the floor that moves around. It is odd, and I happened to see it quite late at night, which was quite nice because it was very empty, and it really reminded me of the new Kane Parsons film Backrooms. So it's strange, but it's definitely one I'd recommend.
Yeah. And anything else people should definitely catch at Art Basel?
Yes, I mean, I think the unlimited sector is always something worth going to and spending some time there. This is basically just where the big works are. And so this year there are 59. There's a tiny little animatronic mouse by Ryan Gander that has had so much attention. There's also a wonderful series of photos by Peter Hoosier that I would definitely recommend.
Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, thank you very much indeed. And that's all we have time for on today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Chris Chermack and Tom Webb, our researcher, Josefina Gomez, and our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Christy O'Grady. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalist returns at the same time on Monday. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.